Jules, we have our Champions League draw, and I have to say, if you're a Serie A fan or if you're a Benfica fan,
Yeah.
you're pretty happy.
You were very happy because you avoided Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Manchester City, Chelsea, of course, as well. Never easy to play against Chelsea. And not just you avoided them in the quarterfinals, Gab. You also avoided them in your semi-final because even if you can face Napoli, if you go past Inter, if you're Benfica, you will face the winner of Milan against Napoli in your semi-finals. So we know for sure that one of Inter, Napoli, Benfica or Milan will reach the Champions League final this year, which in itself is just incredible. That's what we're all here for, to have a different team in the final, one that has never been there like Napoli, one like Benfica who hasn't been there for many, many, many years, and then the 2 million clubs, obviously very close to your heart because you're Milan born and bred. It's just incredible. I love this draw.
It is pretty cool. We still have the shot of the Milan derby in the semi-final, which would be mind-blowing, of course. I think you're right. I think there's 2 points to make. Obviously in terms of the hype that we've had recently in terms of what clubs draw the most attention, that side of the draw may not be it, but there's a ton of history there. There's, 3 of those 4 teams are past European Cup winners.
Yeah.
Milan, of course, winning it 7 times, Inter 3 times, Benfica twice. I think I'm right in saying the last Portuguese team in the Champions League final was 2003-04, and that was Jose Mourinho. So Jose Mourinho's Porto team, of course, going back 19 years for that. Last Serie A team were Juventus in 2017. So going back 6 years there. The other side of the draw, of course, they have 22 Champions League titles, but it is kind of cheating because 14 of them are one team, of course, Real Madrid. I say cheating in a good way. Real Madrid, of course, so dominant. Shall we go through the ties?
Let's go, man.
All right. So Real Madrid versus Chelsea. As you know, on the FC show, I gave my dream draw. This was part of the dream draw because I love managers going back to their old clubs. I think this almost writes itself, right? This is a repeat from last year, though. Crucially, last year, Real Madrid had the second leg at home, which may or may not impact it. I think it impacts it less because there's no away rules away goals rule. But if it does go to extra time, you still get an extra half hour in front of your own fans, which is it nothing. Fair to say, I think both teams perhaps a little bit behind where they would hope to be this season in terms of performance. Chelsea a bit of a bounce with 3 wins in a row in all comps. Real Madrid, the Clasico this weekend, if they lose it at this point, I think all the chips are in the Champions League basket. They may all be in the Champions League basket regardless, right?
Yeah, you're right. And to a certain extent for Chelsea, who are 10th in the Premier League, way back the Champions League places. You could also say that Champions League really is the one thing that can bring a bit of happiness and joy to the fans, to the club, a bit of success as well. Could they go all the way? Of course they can. It's a cup competition. They've won it before when they were maybe not the favorites. Okay, with a completely different squad, but it's still, anything is still possible. Not that long ago they won it. So you're right. For both of them, it's a repeat of last season in a similar narratives in a way, but different context. One different manager, of course, on the bench as well. But it would be really fascinating. And we've said many times that this is Real Madrid's competition. Of course, they have the savoir-faire, that kind of experience that maybe others don't have. But with the second leg at Stamford Bridge, it could be a very, very difficult second leg, I think, for Real Madrid. So really fascinating tie between the two. And let's not forget as well that those games will happen in a month time gap. A lot of things can happen between now and mid-April when those first legs are going to be played.
Oh, my thoughts on that. It's a really valid point. It's like when we have the World Cup draw and they ask us to make predictions, and the World Cup is 6 months away or whatever. It's silly. I think you have to bear that in mind. A lot of things can happen. I think with Real Madrid, most people would have them as favorites in this tie.
Yeah, slightly, yeah.
I find them frustrating because, as you know, I don't like when people bring up intangibles, pedigree, experience, miedo escénico, as they call it in Spain, all this stuff involving Real Madrid. And yet, after last season, This is the only way I can explain all their comebacks and them winning games, that they have, that intangible je ne sais quoi, which puts them over the top. And on paper, this should be a factor over Chelsea, as much as the fact that, they probably are top, 1 to 11, top to bottom, a better side. But as we said, anything can happen. Moving on to Bayern against Manchester City, or I should say Manchester City against Bayern, and City will play the first leg at home first. One of the interesting thing about City is they're the favorites in this side of the draw, and they've never won it. The favorites in the other side of the draw, Napoli, have also never won it. So it's also kind of cool that if this all goes chalk, according to the bookies' favorites, we're going to have two teams in the final that have never won it before, which I think is kind of a neat little factoid. Both teams involved for now. Again, in a month's time, they may not be in a domestic title race. I would have to say, for me, City are favorites in this game, just because the Pep Guardiola, he can say whatever he likes, but the title, obviously, this is the one thing he has not won at Manchester City. His critics will point out it's the one thing he hasn't won without Lionel Messi. How do we see this going? Because this is the classic thing where you've got two managers who like to, I don't want to say overthink, because I don't believe there's such a thing as overthinking, but they're going to pay a lot of attention to how they line up, and we might see a lot of tweaks when they line up against each other.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the Pep Guardiola derby, of course, as you mentioned, for Carlo Ancelotti going back to Chelsea with Real Madrid. It's also Pep going back to Munich, facing Bayern again, facing Nagelsmann, who very much could be one of the heirs to Pep Guardiola. So it's a bit the master against the apprentice again, like with some other managers. It's a fascinating contest, certainly tactically, between the two. I agree with you in the sense that I feel City are the favorite. I haven't been impressed by Bayern Munich, and I saw them twice against PSG, where they deserve to go through, of course, but they were maybe not as dominant compared to past seasons. They were not as brilliant with the ball, I was going to say. I think defensively they can be really solid, although we saw De Ligt and we saw Pavard at times, even Upamecano, making some mistakes. But I still think with the ball there can be some improvement made there. But if Sadio Mane gets back to his best and fully fit, because they've really missed him in the last 3 months, really, even since the return after the World Cup, for example. If Mane is back to his best, if you've got this incredible power in attack with Sané and Gnabry on the bench, for example, and Coman, Musiala, Müller, Choupo-Moting, Mane, this is has to be, in terms of forwards, maybe even more than City, the best forward line that we have right now in the competition. So if Bayern use that well and Nagelsmann use that well, they can hurt City, of course, but I agree with you. I still would put City slightly favorite.
Can I just say, I love the fact that after his Champions League exploits, including scoring the most important goal in the history of Paris Saint-Germain, you put Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting together with the other stars in the attack. Eric Maxim, you have made it. You have made it, right?
And you know what I want to see as well? I want to see Erling Haaland. I mean, okay, Leipzig, 5 goals. We could discuss, big Orban, Vardiol, but this is another test.
It's another test, and I think actually, look, I mean, this is a team that on paper, I think matches up quite well with Manchester City. You wouldn't say that about a lot of teams, but they have defensively, they certainly have the physical strength to deal with Erling Haaland. There's a lot of flat out pace and speed at the back of the Bayern back line with Upamecano, Alphonso Davies. So they match up pretty well there. They have the wingers, and they have wingers who can beat you one-on-one, which I think is also, another game changer, because we can talk about tactics and passing all we want, but if your winger dribbles around the other team's fullback, then you have an overload, and then the other team has a problem. And you talked before about Pep playing with 4 center backs. That's great, but out in the open field one-on-one, there's still center backs having to defend a Gnabry or a Sané. They also have the press that can perhaps disrupt if Müller and Musiala are on top of their game. They can certainly disrupt Rodri and Gundogan or whoever plays in that role. So on paper, I think of a lot of individual matchups, would favor, not in terms of quality necessarily, but in terms of style, would favor Bayern. So I think this is really, really close and really hard to call, Jules.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And also the Joao Cancelo derby, because let's not forget, there's not a clause like we have in the Premier League here that says that he can't play against his current club. So imagine Cancelo feeling when he watched the draw and like, here we go, Pep. We're meeting again.
I love it. That's a guy who will not be lacking for motivation. Looking at the other half of the draw, we have this all Italian affair. Milan against Napoli. It's all right. Again, on paper, Napoli firing in all cylinders. Milan perhaps not. And Milan playing much more defensive than they've done previously. And that's helped them turn things around a little bit domestically. Do we think, though, that, again, in a month's time, maybe Benacer comes back and is fully fit, we could see a different Milan, maybe even a Milan that goes back to the back four, and maybe if Leao sorts out his contract between now and then, maybe they get a bit of a spring of their step, and we see more of last year's Milan in the way they play than this year's Milan.
Yeah, maybe you're right. They've switched to a back three, as we mentioned a lot on our show, and you're not too keen on it, and I can understand. You're right, it's a very different way of playing this season, maybe due to the injuries, due to the form that they had, a bit up and down really through the season. But then I agree with you. Would we see a bit more of the Milan that won the league and was so good last season? But would you want that Milan against Napoli instead of the more defensive Milan? Maybe the more defensive Milan is better equipped to kind of counter this Napoli team that is so good with the ball, that is creating so much, that is overwhelming you everywhere. Or maybe you just find a balance between a bit of the two Milan, the one of this season, the one of last season, to try to counter this Napoli team. Because how do you play against Napoli?
See, that's the thing. I look at Napoli this season, and one of the things, and look, they've been phenomenal, but I think maybe a team that attacks them, a team that gambles a little bit, a team that says, you know what, we will take our chances against Kvaratskhelia and Chucky Lozano if he plays, and of course Osimhen at the other end. But we're going to go and we're going to attack your fullbacks. We're going to run at Mario Rui. We're going to run at Di Lorenzo, right? I wonder if that could possibly be one of the keys to it. Take those guys out of the attack, pin them back somehow, beat them one-on-one. Look, I don't know what else you're going to try against them. Nothing's really worked, right?
No, true.
On paper, what maybe hasn't been tried is some sort of super high possession precision game, but you need really talented players to do that. And I'm not sure Milan have that. Napoli are favorites, but again, Jules, as we know, it's a knockout tie. You got Magic Mike back at the back for Milan, which I think helps a lot of things. So, yeah, I think Napoli favorites, but all to play for.
But just imagine the atmosphere at the Diego Armando Maradona Stadium for that second leg. Whatever happens in the first leg, and you would expect that Milan won't win 4-0 the first leg, so there will be still a lot to play for in that second leg. The atmosphere over there is going to be immense.
Look, I think Naples probably the most superstitious city on earth, and I don't think it's a coincidence that in the year that we lose Diego Armando Maradona and rename the stadium after him, they're having the kind of season that they have. I'm just saying, I'm open to all possibilities, even the metaphysical, on this one. The other clash, Inter against Benfica. Of course, this was a Champions League final, or European Cup as it was then, back in, 64, 65, something like that. You and I have said all along, Benfica flying under the radar, and they really shouldn't be. This is a team that has lost one game all season. Are they favorites against Inter?
I think they are, Gab. I think they are with the second leg at home as well. I think they've been amazing under Roger Schmidt. Even losing Enzo Fernandez in January to go to Chelsea doesn't seem to really have kind of altered the performances or slow them down. Chiquinho has come in and it's been playing really, really well too. They've got so much potential, and I think they'd be, no offense to Inter, they'd be happy with the draw. It could have been far worse. Inter can defend well, and we saw that against Porto, for example. It's back-to-back Portuguese side, by the way, for Simone Inzaghi and his players. But even if you're Inter as well, you know Benfica are doing really well. They knock out Juventus, of course, in the group stage. They top their group ahead of PSG. But if you're Inter, you think like, okay, we have to fancy this as well, because maybe similar game to the Porto one, where you play home first, then you go to Portugal for the second leg. You know that if you take even a slight advantage in the first leg, you can defend well in the second leg, even if you rode your luck a little bit against Porto. This is a really, really good tie, I think.
Yeah, what I think maybe might suggest that, again, I don't generally believe, I know you can win that way, and obviously you can advance that way with kind of like the, bit between the teeth defending in the second leg. I generally don't think it's a great way of playing for most teams. I don't know it's the way that Inter necessarily want to play. And I don't know if it would necessarily work against Benfica, because Benfica, I think, have more individual quality and they have a more attacking mindset than Porto do. I think they're better at forcing mistakes. There's a reason that they're ahead of them. I think Inter are going to have to have their players fit. They're going to have to be proactive in this game. And if they have opportunities when they play, especially at the San Siro, they're going to have to take their opportunities, maybe in a way that they didn't take them against Porto. That which is what set up the second leg. But yeah, on paper, I'm with you. Benfica should be the favorites in this, and we've talked about Benfica and Napoli as if you want the two surprise packages this year. Obviously, we talked more about Napoli, but you made a great point there. Benfica, while they had an easy draw against our friend Scott Parker in Bruges in the last round, before that, they were seriously tested, right? You mentioned Juve, Paris Saint-Germain, and so on. They came out on top. So this is a pretty battle-hardened Benfica team as well. So I think you would probably lean towards them as favorites. But what I like about this is I don't think any tie is a foregone conclusion here, Jules. I mean, what?
No. I agree with you. I think there's so many narratives, so many really good stories. In every tie, you might have a slight favorite, but you could see either teams really winning it. To be fair, you see different styles, you see similar styles, you see managers going back to their old club, playing back to their old club. We didn't even mention the Joe Mario derby as well between Inter and Benfica. So there's just so much there. That's why I think it's a really, really good draw. And we are very excited. I think everybody should be very excited.
All right, final point, because I really, really, really can't resist. All those people on the January transfer window closed, and they said, oh, we need a Super League now because, look, the Premier League, they have way too much money. They're dominating everybody, blah, blah, blah. I look at this. I see 8 teams in the quarterfinals. I only see 2 English teams, and one of those English teams, Chelsea, are not particularly great right now. So I think this kind of shows you still have to go improve it on the pitch, right? It's not just about how much money you spend in the transfer window.
Definitely. And if you look at the work that Benfica are doing, for example, or Napoli are doing in terms of how they spend their money, okay, Osimhen is an expensive player, but Kvaratskhelia isn't, Zombo Anguissa isn't, Lobotka isn't. We can go, the list goes down as well of the really good, smart signing that they've made. And same for Benfica. Yeah, the academy is great, of course, but they still go and sign some really interesting players that make a difference in that team. So it's great, and you're right. It makes a good point against the ones who are pro Super League.
And I think it rewards clubs that have been well run. Milan, for all their ills, have been very, very well run. Beyond Benfica, Napoli, where we mentioned losing players, retrenching, cutting the wage bill, and coming back stronger. It shows that it matters. It matters to you're not just assembling Panini stickers here. If you can run your club well, if you get smart people, if you're good at your job from an organizational perspective, that has a huge impact as well.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.